Mega Man X, one of the greatest video games ever made. Came out in the early 90s. A reinvention of the classic Mega Man formula, X is still praised today for its tight action and fantastically satisfying gameplay. About a decade and 7 sequels after the game's release, Mega Man X Command Mission arrived. This role-playing entry in the Mega Man universe is simultaneously bizarre, intriguing, and surprisingly fun. Mega Man X Command Mission remains the black sheep of the Mega Man universe. It's not quite the unsung hero of the franchise, but it represents an important branching out into other genre spaces.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Completionist, where we don't just beat the games, we complete them. Almost 12 years ago, I started this channel with a video about a little game called Mega Man X. And if you're a long-time fan of the show, you'll know it's because I think Mega Man X is quite possibly one of the most satisfying games ever to play, let alone complete. It is the quintessential example of a game that executes on everything that it tries to do. It is compact, it is perfect, it is unique. So that's that game. But today, we're talking about Mega Man X's weird RPG cousin, Mega Man X Command Mission. Mega Man as a series has always been one that I've enjoyed, and I'm well on my way towards completing almost every game in the X series, which means of course I would eventually tackle this one. Mega Man X Command Mission marks an exciting departure for X, Zero, and also it's doomed to be remembered as an underrated gem that has been memory holed, if you know what I mean. So let's find why together, as today I complete Mega Man X Command Mission.
Yes! All glory goes to the winner!
Imagine, if you will, that you yourself are a producer at Capcom working on the Mega Man series in the late 90s. You've had some hard times recently. The X series is not seen by critics as groundbreaking or revolutionary as it once was. After several sequels that were, shall we say, less than positively received. So what do? Do you double down on the things that make Mega Man an icon? Or do you create something so off the wall that you never approach the genre the same way again? Strangely, it's a bit of both with Command Mission. Though not exactly Mega Man's first foray into the RPG space, shoutouts to Mega Man Battle Network, Command Mission marks the first time that the X series and RPGs mixed all the way back in 2004. Capcom, a longtime steward of Mega Man as a whole, had put a new producer in charge of the X games. I'm gonna ruin this one, but here we go. Tatsuya Kitabayashi. Kitabayashi was in charge of Mega Man X7, which took some big swings with what fans had come to expect, and Command Mission takes even bigger swings, as it basically forgoes the action gameplay the series is known for and replaces it with pretty traditional RPG mechanics. One thing that didn't change is Command Mission's dedication to the ongoing story and lore of the Mega Man X franchise. Mega Man X has always been a surprisingly lore-heavy series, and every new entry is denser than the last. Command Mission takes place in the X universe and features several familiar characters, but tells a brand new story. Is it considered canon? Who cares? That's for other YouTube channels to dissect and discuss. Essentially, X, the Maverick Hunter we all know and love, is called into Giga City to stop an emerging rebellion, led by the mysterious Epsilon. There's an element called Force Metal that every Reploid around wants to get their hands on, but X is not alone. He's got Zero, the biggest badass around, and Axel, the Poochie of the Mega Man X universe. All right, it's a joke, calm down. Command Mission also introduces a ton of new other characters, and a plot that has all the melodrama and robo-antics players expect from Mega Man X. Action, high stakes, betrayal. Command Mission's got it all. But where Command Mission has truly stood out from other Mega Man titles is its mechanics. It is straight up a RPG with all that entails. There are NPCs, random encounters that lead to turn-based battles, status effects, grinding, even secret endgame bosses that are practically impossible to defeat unless you raise the level of your party far beyond what you might need to finish the main story. Command Mission was also notable at the time for being an RPG available on the Nintendo Gamecube, a console notorious for its lack of RPG support. Though, I gotta be clear on this, for the purpose of this video, I did complete the PlayStation 2 version of this title. Sorry, Game Boy Advance to GameCube link cable. I'll dig you out of the useless accessories drawer some other time. Don't you worry, Four Swords Adventures. Your time will come. It's also worth mentioning that I played this game on the PlayStation 2 because there was no modern re-release or remaster of Mega Man X Command Mission. It is conspicuously absent from any of the legacy collections that Capcom has put together and remains a spin-off that is difficult to find at all, let alone play comfortably on a modern console, aka that should be expensive. Completing any RPG on this show is usually a tall order, and I would be lying if I said I wasn't dreading completing this one. Mega Man X Command Mission's unusual structure means there are a lot of weird, specific things tied to completion on top of the stuff I've come to expect in completing other RPGs, like the aforementioned endgame boss fights and level grinding. Finishing the story is a given, as is collecting a ton of different items from every area, but Mega Man X Command Mission also has a bunch of in-game unlockables, figurines of different characters, concept art, even music tracks and cutscene clips that have different requirements to unlock. Previous Mega Man X games didn't really have stuff like this, relying instead on different armor sets and hidden areas to provide completion bonuses. But Mega Man X Command Mission is very much its own game, and completing it reflects that. Of course, just because something charts its own path doesn't immediately make it amazing, but being good enough is absolutely solid for Mega Man X Command Mission. Something I've always loved about Mega Man X is that the series has always had a super distinct aesthetic identity. Mega Man X Command Mission carries this tradition forward. This game still feels very unique, and that is largely due to how it looks and even sounds. Giga City and the surrounding areas have a distinct feel. Instead of the classic boss selection screen from the majority of the Mega Man games, in Command Mission you can run around and explore environments that feel a little more immersive than some of the other games in the series. The big chunky polygons from Mega Man X7 return here, and though the game hasn't aged as gracefully as some other 2D titles, I think it still looks pretty alright. I will say that I found the soundtrack to be one of the weakest in the series, though that might be due in part to the nature of the game. Instead of short levels that you can finish in a couple of minutes, if you're completing Command Mission, you'll be hearing a lot of the same music for hours at a time as you grind for levels or face bosses over and over again. However, Command Mission does nail a couple of things that not every RPG manages to do: decent UI and solid menuing. In RPGs like this, a decent menu system is absolutely crucial. It doesn't feel good to select attack, items, and other options during battle. You're gonna have a bad time. Fortunately, Command Mission's menus and UI are great. They may not look or sound as iconic as some of the PS1 or PS2 Square Enix RPGs, but Command Mission's menus absolutely get the job done. But menus and text aren't the reason we love the X series. Character design and world building are major factors here. Command Mission's boss designs are some of the craziest the series has ever done. Dr. Psyche is a humanoid mushroom robot, a far cry from the animal-themed bosses that make up the bulk of X's foes. There's even a winged dominatrix in the form of Fairham. The designers were clearly going ham on these boss fights, and they largely work for me. That said, the voiceover performances are, well, they are what they are. They tried. Back in my day, we took what we could get, and if we could get a few catchphrases out of the deal, we call it a win. The voice work in Mega Man X Command Mission is extremely cheesy, but really fun, in a way that only early 2000s JRPG enthusiasts can expect. There is a lot of location variety here that serves to differentiate Command Mission from the other X titles. The central tower is kind of the main hub that feels lively and populated, though some of the laboratories and weapons plants sort of blend into each other over time. Again, I'd say that they largely work, and there is a certain charm in being able to explore a Mega Man X themed world in a way that hadn't really been done before up to this point. At the end of the day, though, Command Mission's completionist draw lives or dies by its mechanics, and overall, the battle systems and other mechanics are more than serviceable. If you had told me 20 years ago that Capcom was developing a brand new RPG from the creators of Breath of Fire set in a sci-fi world full of revolutionaries and experimental technology, I would have said, I'm 13, get out of my house. But seriously, a Mega Man X themed RPG? Who signed off on this? But I mean it when I say that not only does Command Mission exceed my expectations, it is still one of the most interesting RPGs of its era thanks to its battle system and setting. Now, the world building in the X series has always been enjoyable. The vibe is somewhat goofy yet serious, and even if it seems to revolve around the same handful of characters, there is always a sense of urgency and melodrama to be had in spades. The developers leaned into the world building and storytelling aspect for this game, even as they distanced themselves from formally series-defining run-and-gun gameplay. And somehow, this approach works really well. Mega Man X Command Mission has got to be one of the weirdest genre blends since Mario RPG. I wouldn't say that Command Mission is particularly deep or satisfying as other games of its type, but the way it blends RPG conventions and elements into the Mega Man X setting is solid. Now, when I say RPG conventions, Command Mission checks all of the boxes. You're sent out to conquer different levels, essentially running through linear corridors, smashing trash mobs until you reach the boss of that area. Eventually, you'll unlock the Sky Room, which has several challenges to complete. Some of these challenges are simple, like talking to NPCs 100 times or defeating 100 enemies. Some are a little tougher to achieve, like dealing 9,999 damage in one attack. And some aren't even challenges at all, like saving the game 50 times or playing for more than 25 hours. But hey, it wouldn't be a JRPG of this era unless there was a bunch of extremely random stuff tied to completing the full game. There are side quests too, in the form of Reploid deployment, where you can send deactivated Reploids on missions to raise their rank and get them to the Hall of Fame status. The real meat of Mega Man X Command Mission is its battle system and the characters that fight alongside X. You've got your standard turn-based battles, but with the Mega Man flavor of characters being able to equip and use sub-weapons. Characters also have their action trigger, basically a special, but using this ends your turn, so you've got to be careful when you whip it out. Every character also has a hyper mode, which massively increases their stats and can even change up weapons and action triggers. Knowing when to fire off an action trigger or activate hyper mode is a fun back and forth to contend with and gives battles a completely unique flavor. What I love about this battle system is that players have a lot of information to work with at any given moment. You always know the turn order of enemies in your party, and it's easy to tell at a glance the health and status of your party and foes. The X series has flirted with RPG elements before, with different types of armor sets that gave the player different abilities. But Command Mission introduces an entire party, and every character has different qualities and specialties. Learning the ins and outs of every character feels exceptionally satisfying, and by the end of the game, I definitely had some favorites. Obviously, we've got our boy X as the leader of the group. You would think his abilities would reflect his 2D suite of skills, but in Command Mission, I think of him as kind of a spellcaster. His attacks do big AoE damage, and he eventually becomes one of the most powerful attackers in the game. I definitely dig his suit design in this game too, and I love how it looks like X is wearing a cool red scarf every time he runs around. And of course, Zero is here too, though due to plot reasons, he takes a little longer to show up than you might initially expect. He acts as a powerful melee fighter. He's a little tanky, which is kind of a switch from his previous appearances where he can't take much damage at all. Zero can dish it out as well as take it in Command Mission, and his special ability is a nice nod to other Capcom games. Every action trigger activates differently, and for Zero's, you basically have to give an input to what feels like a fighting game or a fighting game input. The party is only 3 characters at a single time, but you are able to swap characters off the bench, sort of similarly to that of Final Fantasy X, and rotate them into battle when needed. That said, I made an effort to use every character as often as possible, even our Rouge the Bad knockoff Marino, who just might have the highest damage output in the game. I genuinely think the character designs for playable characters across the board are really strong here. Every character pretty much fits into an RPG stereotype, from knights and thieves to soldier classes. And it wouldn't be a JRPG if there wasn't something that completely screwed with your battle strategy about halfway through the game. Spoilers for Command Mission to follow, but only if you're not truly paying attention to what the game is shoving in your face from pretty much the very beginning. One of the additions to our party is Spider. Spider has a cool black hat and a roguish personality. He's sort of an on-again, off-again ally until somewhere around chapter 10, he dies, and any items Spider was carrying are gone. So if you were relying on him to carry you through fights thanks to his cool long-range weapons and abilities that let him target multiple weak enemies at once, well, you're SOL. Thankfully, the rest of the party more than makes up for his loss, but it can be jarring to lose a character that you spend hours and hours building up. Always a rough time. This is why I have a trust issue with JRPGs. First Final Fantasy and now Mega Man. Spider also starts with equipment that lets him steal items, an ability which is extremely rare and useful. Now, I'm not totally opposed to this concept of removing a party member for good. Other RPGs have done it, including one of my favorites of all time. But it's still a loss, and can absolutely upend the completion experience. Fortunately, I was able to rely on my other party members to make it through the secret boss battles. The bulk of this game doesn't really ask too much from the player. I'd say it's relatively easy to beat the story, but completionists have a few special tasks to handle that take command mission from fun to tragically annoying and back again with mixed results. Mega Man X Command Mission has decent pacing, a bonkers plot, and a solid battle system. These elements are more than enough for the average player to push through and enjoy the game. The Command Mission asks a lot more specifically for completionists. Completing the story, aka what most people would consider beating the game, is not that bad. This is a pretty tight RPG lengthwise. I would say it doesn't overstay its welcome in the story department. There's betrayal and action, and X and Zero get to kick some ass. All pretty gravy. At times it feels like an 80s action movie, heartfelt yet over the top. But finishing the story and seeing the outcome of the plot is hardly the end of the game. Now, I mentioned Skyrim challenges earlier and how their difficulty ranges from, oh, just play the game then, to who in their right mind would ever want or do this. I wouldn't say any of them were that hard to pull off. Some just required a stupid amount of time, like earning over 100,000 experience points across all party members isn't a tough thing to do, it's just annoying. Same with doing 100 critical hits. Not a hard thing to do, especially if you're lucky, but anything tied to RNG shouldn't have a tangible reward in my opinion. That said, I did like that there was actual stuff to unlock for completing all 36 challenges. Different sketches and posters, even different colors for X's scarf can be unlocked by completing these various tasks. I guess when I think of challenge, I'm hardwired to assume these are optional battles or tasks that will test my abilities in some way, which is not really what they are in this game. They function more like milestones, which if you are planning on devoting a ton of time to this game anyway, you'll likely hit at some point if you keep your battle strategies varied and fully explore levels as you beat them. Now, secret bosses. All right, these are an entire other can of worms. Now, don't get me wrong, I love me an optional boss or two. They are a staple of the genre. In fact, in a lot of RPGs, the final boss battle of the story is often not nearly as challenging as whatever optional boss the player took the time to seek out beforehand. In this game, the optional battles against the Tails clan are not even available until you beat the story. The clan is hanging out in the bottom of the central tower, unreachable until you've earned a key accessory. The 9 members of the Tails clan all have a gimmick to overcome, which makes some fights more interesting than others. Some of them heal themselves automatically, others revive each other, and the final member, Ninetales, has pretty much every ability of his clan combined. It's a tough gauntlet, but actually pretty fun and a great excuse to return after beating the game. There are 2 other optional boss battles that unlock another Mega Man staple, special armors. The duck-billed moles, which sounds like they should be on the cover of National Geographic, and Rafflesian. Beating these bosses unlocks the ultimate armor for X and Absolute Zero respectively. These armors provide cool new sub-weapons and abilities for both X and Zero, and also, they just look super sick, which is always a great bonus. But that's endgame stuff. Completing Command Mission meant I had to take care of business as I went along. Something that sticks out in a negative way for me was handling deployment missions, of which there are a limited amount. This meant that my little mechanoloids could only be sent out to scout so many times before strip mining an area of its loot and losing a chance to rank up. Missions are not infinite, so to get my robo buddies to Hall of Fame status meant I had to monitor which scouts I sent out so I didn't accidentally lock myself out of this situation. Again, not overtly difficult to do, I was literally just telling these bots where to go from the mission table, but it did require more attention that would be better spent playing the game itself. This entire feature reminded me of the similar mechanics in Assassin's Creed Syndicate or Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, where I'd send crew members to take care of business for me and wait around to see how well they did. But the real thing that crimped my style here, that takes Mega Man X Command Mission from a mid-grade RPG to a completionist time suck, is a little area called the Eternal Forest. Anything with Eternal right there in the name gives me a major red flag going off situation. In this case, it's essentially a maze of 16 rooms with branching paths that have different rewards at the end of each path. So you know I had to make sure I completed every single path. This is one of those moments where I am very thankful to the GameFAQs warriors of old. I salute you and thank you for your service. The entire Eternal Forest debacle leads to some really tough battles, so I don't recommend attempting every path until you level up a very good amount, which leads to another Command Mission complaint, the grinding. There are absolutely fights in this game that will stomp you unless you have certain characters leveled up, which I guess is the case in most RPGs, let alone JRPGs, RPGs, but it really did stick out for me here. For most of the game, the challenge level is low, so much so that I didn't even use any of my consumables I had because I didn't have to. But every now and then, there's an extremely unforgiving boss fight that can blindside the player. I wouldn't quite go as far as to say it's a total lack of balance, but don't be surprised if you're trying to complete this game and realize that you've been focusing on characters that don't blend well together. Party dynamics are still a thing, and it can be a bit of a shock when late game fights suddenly bring that into focus. That said, I always loved my team of Zero, Cinnamon, and Axel for farming items. And even though you can probably beat the story at your party around level 30, I needed to be at least in the 70s for the optional final boss fight. So keep that in mind if you're chasing that completionist cred. Overall, Command Mission is a valiant effort for taking the X series into brand new territory. I'd say it's largely successful, even if by the end of the game and all that level grinding, I don't think X is even the most powerful character in his own game. Somehow, that honor goes to Axel, a character that was so pushed so hard that we couldn't help but hate him. Command Mission may not be reinventing the wheel for RPGs and JRPGs aside, but as a Mega Man X spin-off, it fills a niche that is otherwise unoccupied if you can stomach the padding. So for as much weird padding is folded into Mega Man X Command Mission, I still found myself compelled to complete everything. And I felt like I was rewarded for doing so thanks to some fun bonuses. Yes, since this is an RPG, some of those bonuses feel a little bit too late, but others are just right. The 2 secret armors obtained from optional bosses are really solid endgame equipment. Absolute Zero is an incredible bonus, a fittingly powerful thing for Zero to use for any final fights or cleanup I wanted to take care of. The action trigger for this armor set gives Zero the chance to input a bunch of fighting game combinations to deal bigger and bigger damage. But weirdly enough, there's no Hadouken. Where's the Hadouken? I'm mashing buttons here, trying to get as many of these inputs in as possible as I can, but somehow the classic Capcom staple and previous Mega Man X Easter egg is MIA? Come on. And I'm not trying to make a mountain out of a duck-billed molehill here. I was just surprised by how much I missed this little nod to Street Fighter when the opportunity was literally right there in its own mechanics. The other unlockables are fun, but none are as useful as these secret armors. There's a move that Axel unlocks after defeating the Tails clan that basically lets him one-shot anything, but again, there's not much battling left to do if you've already defeated these bosses. Axel's Ancient Gun is admittedly pretty sweet, but there isn't really anyone to fire at by the time the weapon is earned. All that to say, outside of gameplay bonuses, I did like finding all of the little figure tokens that I could spend at the vending machines to obtain figurines. And it's always a delight to earn concept art and music clips from various other parts of the game. The data terminal in the Sky Room is a great checklist for completionists, clearly laying out what I obtained and how I obtained it. Having a place in-game to look at all my stuff has always been a favorite thing of mine. One completion element that I wish more games would implement. One thing to keep in mind, some of the figurines are locked behind passwords that were for pre-order bonus only. Not an issue really, since we've gotten the good old internet out there to pull out those passwords from. It's something to keep in mind if you don't want to miss out. All told, you can probably crash through the story and beat this game in less than 18 hours. But if you're committed to grinding out all the characters to the highest levels, finding all 10 posters, 100 pieces of concept art, dozens of hidden figures, taking out every single boss, and fully exploring every single path of the Eternal Forest like I did, you can expect completing Command Mission to take a little longer. 45-ish hours total isn't terrible by any means, but I do wish that grinding had a little more substance attached to it by the end of the game.
Mega Man X Command Mission holds a special place now in my heart. It's definitely strange, strangely good, and a pretty fun time for a new RPG, let alone the possibilities of what could have been a new RPG series. We never got a sequel to Command Mission, but it's something that fans may have wanted. Who knows? Might be coming down to the pipeline in the future, but if you're looking for something different and need to scratch that early 2000s RPG itch as we wait for, you know, the Tales of Symphonia remaster eventually coming out, you can do a lot worse than what we've got right here. That said, completing everything here doesn't quite have the same satisfaction for me as completing a mainline Mega Man X game. So, with that in mind, guys, I give this game my completionist rating of finish it.
Finish it!